Komanda, Ituri province, northeastern Congo. Don't forget those words. Write them down. Either in your notebook, in your phone, or just in your mind. Komanda, Ituri province, northeastern Congo. Less than 1 week ago, 43 people, including 9 children, had gathered in a church in Komanda for a night vigil. Such all-night prayers or part-night prayers are very common across Africa. People do that when they feel that they just need to recharge. They need to seek the face of God. They need spiritual replenishment. Millions of people do that. It is a sacred time. By the time somebody makes that decision to go for a prayer vigil at night, it's not a decision that is just made lightly. They just want spiritual replenishment. They just want to gather collectively for prayer. If you have ever done that, I want you to think back to the time that you did it. And even if you've never gone for an all-night prayer session, I just want you to think about a time when you felt that you just needed spiritual replenishment in your life. You just needed to be alone with God. You just needed to take time out so that you can recharge. Think about that time. Maybe even now you're feeling that way. These 43 people were simply doing that, simply partaking in a spiritual process that they had every right to partake in. Now, spirituality is in itself something very intimate. So they were at an intimate place. And so they went to church. They had dinner in their homes. They dressed warmly, put on some jackets. And you know, all of them had that burden of their country also. Apart from seeking individual spiritual replenishment, they also just wanted to pray for Congo because of all these problems that Congo is going through, because of all this death. They had prayer requests. And you can be sure that on top of those prayer requests, on top of that list was a peace of Congo, the prosperity of Congo. But first of all, peace. Because you cannot have anything else if you don't have peace. And so they were seeking divine intervention for peace to prevail in their beloved country. So they went to church. And Africans, being the extremely melodious and rhythmic people that we are, they started off that session with a lot of songs, praise and worship they call it. They praised and then they worshipped. The praise was jubilant because Africans by and large have a joyous spirit that is often amplified when they're praising God. And so you can be sure that the praise was jubilant, celebratory. In fact, peering into that church from outside, you might have been mistaken to ask yourself, why did they seem so celebratory? Despite the sheer challenges and problems that they were going through. But they celebrated God, and then they worshipped. At that point, some of them might have begun to shed tears. Tears of joy, tears of pain, because in that quiet, intimate place, when it is just you and God having a conversation, your spirit stirs like a candle lighting up despite the wind. They were in that place, and then they dove into prayer. That long list of prayer requests that they had, with peace being at the very top, they began to pray for peace to prevail in their country, for peace to prevail in their region. They prayed for wisdom and courage for their leaders. They began to pray. They felt that their very leaders, that people, that human beings had failed over the last 6 decades to bring peace to Congo. And so they sought divine intervention. And then, in the thick of the night, in that thick of the night, when everything was silent apart from their prayers, their agonized prayers, when the cold was tearing through their jackets, through their laces and victories, through their wrappers, the cold was tearing through that. In that quiet time of the night, when the rest of the world was asleep, when people in Kenya were deep in sleep, peacefully, when people in Tanzania were deep asleep, people in Uganda were deep asleep, people in Rwanda, Angola, all these neighboring countries, when people were deep asleep in dreamland, that night was shattered when a gang burst into that church. At first, those who were deep in prayer might have thought that the shrieks and cries they were hearing were simply cries of intense prayer. But within seconds, it became clear that that wasn't the case. Some of them did not even have time to collect their thoughts, because no sooner had they opened their eyes than they saw these glaring men descending on them with machetes. By the time these men were done, 43 of these worshippers lay dead, some of them beheaded. They had all been killed by ADF. They had all been killed by ADF, a jihadist affiliated group that has been wreaking havoc in this part of Congo for many, many, many years. ADF is affiliated with the Islamic State. It is a jihadist group that has a sinister, evil agenda in Congo. They killed 43 innocent worshippers. Nine of them were children. Innocent children who simply accompanied their parents for the prayer session. Innocent children who do not even understand the whole concept behind jihadists. Innocent children, 9 of them, slaughtered using machetes. Now, by the time the world knew about this attack, the following day, these people's lifeless bodies had just become but statistics of the deaths that go on in Congo almost every single day. Some perpetrated by M23, some by ADF, others by the dozens and dozens of militant groups, rebel groups that fight in the Congo. And then, over the next couple of days, another tragedy unfolded. This one was as silent as that night had been before the ADF jihadists descended on that church. Here's the silent tragedy that then unfolded across the world, including my own living room. When people watched on their phone screens or on their televisions that 43 worshippers had been killed in Congo, the vast majority of people simply shrugged and moved on to the next story. They simply shrugged and moved on to the next story. 43 worshippers killed by jihadists using machetes, some of them beheaded. If that had happened in New York or London or Nairobi or Johannesburg or Dubai, it would have been front page news and people would not simply have moved on to the next story. There's something there that we need to dissect, because unless we get to the heart of that, there will never be justice for those 43 people who lost their lives. And we cannot allow their lives and deaths to be in vain like that. They cannot be mere statistics. Now, earlier this year in February, in that same region, there was a similar attack. And in that attack, a town called Kasanga, more than 80 people lost their lives. More than 80. But what shocked me, what completely shocked me, is how that attack was swept under the carpet. The United Nations at that time said that the attack was not verified. And so the vast majority of mainstream media did not even report about that attack. Just search for it. Search for the Kasanga massacre. You will barely find any mainstream media that covered that attack, partly because the UN said it wasn't verified. And so it fell on church outlets to say that, in fact, the attack did happen, including the Vatican News. How bad must things get for an attack where more than 80 people are slaughtered using machetes to go completely uncovered by most of mainstream media? That is why you didn't hear about that particular attack, but now you've heard about it. And so there's something happening in Congo that is extremely sinister, that we must spotlight and that we must take action on. We must do so. We must do it. Now, let's revisit ADF. ADF in full is Allied Democratic Forces. Allied Democratic Forces. These groups sometimes come up with fancy names like those that give them a measure of normalcy. But ADF is simply a jihadist group that has been in Congo for so many years now. It came from Uganda, but now it has morphed into that plethora of rebel groups, only that their agenda has a jihadist slant. And one of the challenges that is now in Congo is the heinous crimes, the sheer evil of what the ADF has done is sometimes forgotten. So we must look at the totality of the evil that is being perpetrated in the Congo. You cannot have a scenario where innocent worshippers are slaughtered and killed by machetes and life goes on as if nothing has happened. So let's go back to that sinister reason why this evil is being perpetrated in Congo, why it is often met with deafening silence, not just from mainstream media, but even from the people themselves, including us Africans. We must address that sinister reason, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this episode, so that we can root it out together. Black Lives Matter. That phrase rang around the world, resounded around the world, with a lot of power and ferocity, rightfully so, after that onslaught of police, brutal police, extrajudicial killings in the United States of America. Black Lives Matter. Now, we need to also ask the question, what then do we do about it? Because it's not about asking anybody permission to validate the fact that Black Lives Matter, that African lives matter. We don't need nobody's permission. The fact that Black Lives Matter is a foregone conclusion. But the reason the world needed to be reminded was because in the United States of America, the police were often and still do treating black lives as if they don't matter. Now, when you're looking at the Democratic Republic of Congo, when you're looking at the deafening silence that often meets massacres and tragedies, like that one, where 43 people were massacred in church. And even when there's no deafening silence, even when the media reports about it, there's still deafening silence from the readers, from the consumers of that news. African lives cannot just be treated like that. And so we must redefine our relationship with the tragedy in Congo. We must recalibrate our relationship with the tragedy in Congo, because if we don't do so, we will simply become passive consumers of that tragedy. And that will only embolden the likes of M23 and ADF and dozens of those other rebel groups. and the powers, the puppeteers that pull the strings from the shadows. So how do we redefine our relationship with the tragedies that are ongoing in Congo?